The image is etched into history. A lone warrior, clad in intricate armor, his hand resting on the hilt of a legendary blade. He is the samurai, the perfect warrior, bound by an unbreakable code of honor. Bushido. For centuries, this ideal has captivated the world, a symbol of discipline, loyalty, and martial perfection. But beneath the polished steel and serene philosophy lies a more complex and often contradictory truth. Was Bushido a timeless spiritual guide, or a myth crafted long after the last battlefield fell silent? This is the story of the rise and fall of Japan's warrior class, a journey into the heart of their code. We will separate the man from the legend, the history from the myth, to understand what it truly meant to live and to perish by the sword. This is the story of the samurai and the code that both defined and ultimately consumed them. In the 10th century, the heart of Japan beat in Heian, modern-day Kyoto. Here, the emperor presided over a court of unparalleled refinement and artistic brilliance. Life was a performance of poetry, calligraphy, and subtle romantic intrigue. But beyond the perfumed halls of the capital, a different Japan was taking shape. The authority of the central government was fading, its reach tenuous in the rugged provinces. Vast, tax-exempt estates, known as shuen, grew in size and wealth, controlled by powerful aristocratic families and influential temples. These landowners, far from the emperor's protection, needed to defend their holdings from ambitious neighbors and common bandits. They required a new kind of defender. They began to hire and train private soldiers, men whose lives were dedicated to martial prowess. These were the first stirrings of the samurai, the one who serves. Initially, they were little more than hired guards, provincial enforcers, whose primary value was their skill with a horse and bow. They were rugged, practical men, a stark contrast to the delicate sensibilities of the court nobles they served. Yet, as the court's influence waned, the power of these provincial warriors grew. Two clans, in particular, rose to prominence through their military might: the Taira and the Minamoto. Both traced their lineage to imperial princes who had left the court to seek their fortunes in the provinces. They built vast networks of loyalty, attracting lesser warriors to their banners with promises of land and status. A new social order was being forged, not in the quiet halls of the capital, but on the training grounds and contested borders of the countryside. The elegant brush was slowly being replaced by the sharpened sword. The foundations of a warrior-dominated society were being laid, one armed retainer at a time. An inevitable collision of worlds was approaching, a clash between the old order of the court and the rising power of the warrior that would redefine Japan forever. By the late 12th century, the simmering rivalry between the two great warrior clans, the Taira and the Minamoto, could no longer be contained. The Taira had masterfully infiltrated the imperial court, seizing key positions and effectively ruling Japan in the emperor's name. Their leader, Taira no Kiyomori, was the most powerful man in the country, but his ambition bred resentment. In 1180, an aging Minamoto patriarch and a disenfranchised prince issued a call to arms, igniting the conflict that would become known as the Genpei War. For 5 brutal years, Japan was torn apart. This was not a war of subtle courtly maneuvers. It was a nationwide struggle for supremacy that tested the very limits of loyalty, endurance, and martial skill. From the ashes of defeat rose a new Minamoto leader, the cold, calculating Minamoto no Yoritomo. Operating from his base in Kamakura, he orchestrated the clan's revival. He was aided by his brilliant, almost reckless younger brother, Yoshitsune, a military genius whose daring tactics secured one victory after another. The war was a gallery of epic moments that would be immortalized in Japanese literature. It was a crucible where the warrior identity was forged. Tales of incredible bravery, cunning strategy, and profound sacrifice became the foundation of samurai lore. The conflict reached its dramatic conclusion in 1185 at the naval battle of Dan no Ura. Here, the entire Taira clan, including the child emperor Antoku and the sacred imperial regalia, made their last stand against the Minamoto fleet. The outcome was decisive. The Minamoto were victorious, and the Taira were virtually annihilated. The battle marked the end of an era. The age of courtly dominance was over. The warriors had proven themselves the undeniable masters of Japan. But with total victory achieved, a new, more personal conflict began to brew within the Minamoto clan itself, as the pragmatic ambition of the elder brother, Yoritomo, would soon clash with the celebrated fame of the younger, Yoshitsune. With the Taira clan vanquished, Minamoto no Yoritomo stood as the undisputed military master of Japan. But he was not content to simply be the power behind the throne, as the Taira had been. He envisioned a new system, a government of warriors for warriors. In 1192, the beleaguered imperial court granted him the title of Sei Tai Shogun, or Great General for Subduing Barbarians. It was a temporary military title that Yoritomo would make permanent. This was the birth of the shogunate. To insulate his new government from the corrupting influence of the imperial court, Yoritomo established his capital far to the east, in the seaside town of Kamakura. This new administration, known as the Bakufu, or tent government, was efficient, martial, and direct. It established a network of constables and stewards across the country, loyal directly to Kamakura, creating a parallel system of authority that superseded the old imperial structure. The emperor remained in Kyoto, a revered spiritual and cultural figurehead, but with no real political power. Japan now had two capitals, one for ceremony and one for command. Yoritomo's rule was defined by a cold pragmatism. He understood that his authority rested on absolute loyalty and control. This led him to a heartbreaking decision regarding his own family. His younger brother, Yoshitsune, the hero of the Genpei War, had become too popular, too famous. Seeing him as a potential rival, Yoritomo declared his own brother an outlaw. Hunted and betrayed, the brilliant commander was eventually cornered and met his end. The tragic fate of Yoshitsune became a cautionary tale about the unforgiving nature of power. Yoritomo had secured his position, but at a great personal cost. He had successfully dismantled the old order and created a new one in its place, a system where the samurai were not just protectors, but rulers. The Kamakura shogunate would govern Japan for nearly 150 years, cementing the warrior class at the apex of society. Under the Kamakura shogunate, the warrior's way of life was codified and perfected. Long before the term Bushido became common, the guiding principle was Kyuba no Michi, the way of the horse and bow. This was the essential identity of the Kamakura samurai. It was a practical code, born not of philosophy, but of battlefield necessity. A warrior's worth was measured by his mastery of these two disciplines. Training began in childhood. Sons of samurai families learned to ride almost as soon as they could walk, developing an intimate bond with their mounts. The bow was their primary weapon. Unlike the foot soldiers of Europe, the elite samurai was a mounted archer, a mobile weapons platform capable of harassing enemy formations and picking off targets with astonishing accuracy. The art of yabusame, or mounted archery, was a spectacular display of skill, requiring perfect balance, a steady hand, and an unwavering eye while galloping at full speed. While the iconic katana sword is often seen as the primary symbol of the samurai, in this era, it was a secondary weapon, used for close-quarters fighting after the arrows had been spent. The long tachi sword, worn slung from the belt with the edge down, was a sign of status, but the bow was the true arbiter of battle. The armor, or yoroi, was a work of art in itself, a boxy construction of lacquered leather and iron scales laced together with silk cords. It was designed to provide protection while allowing the flexibility needed to draw a bow on horseback. This focus on martial excellence was underpinned by a simple, yet absolute, ethical code. Loyalty to one's lord was the highest virtue, overriding all other obligations, including family. Betrayal was the ultimate disgrace. Courage in the face of adversity and a calm acceptance of one's fate were expected. This was not a written philosophy, but an ingrained culture, a set of expectations that governed a warrior's life from his first day of training to his last battle. It was a rugged, demanding existence that created some of the most formidable mounted archers the world has ever seen. In the late 13th century, a threat of unimaginable scale appeared on the horizon. Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan and ruler of a vast empire stretching from China to Europe, sent envoys to Japan demanding submission. The Kamakura shogunate, led by the resolute Hojo regents, refused. The Khan's response was inevitable. In 1274, a massive Mongol, Chinese, and Korean fleet carrying over 30,000 soldiers landed on the shores of Hakata Bay. The samurai, accustomed to ritualized combat and one-on-one duels, were shocked by the Mongol way of war. The invaders fought as a disciplined, coordinated force. They moved in tight formations under the sound of drums and gongs, firing volleys of poisoned arrows and launching ceramic shells filled with gunpowder that exploded with terrifying noise and light. The Japanese warriors fought with incredible bravery, but they were pushed back. Just as the situation seemed desperate, the weather turned. A ferocious storm descended upon the bay, battering the invasion fleet and forcing a Mongol withdrawal. The samurai had been granted a reprieve. Knowing the Khan would return, they spent the next 7 years building a massive stone wall along the coast of Hakata Bay and preparing for a second, even larger invasion. It came in 1281 with a combined force of nearly 150,000 men, one of the largest naval invasions in history. For weeks, the samurai held the line, preventing the invaders from establishing a secure beachhead behind the new defensive wall. Then, once again, the heavens intervened. A powerful typhoon, later named the Kamikaze, or Divine Wind, swept through the strait, obliterating the Mongol armada. The invasion was over. Japan was saved. The samurai and the shogunate celebrated what they saw as divine protection. But the victory came at a crippling cost. The years of defensive preparation had exhausted the government's treasury. There were no new lands to distribute as rewards, leading to widespread resentment among the warriors who had fought so valiantly. The divine winds had repelled the foreign invaders, but they had also sown the seeds of internal conflict that would ultimately bring down the Kamakura shogunate. How could a class of professional soldiers, whose lives were defined by conflict and impermanence, find a sense of inner peace? For many samurai, the answer lay not in doctrine or scripture, but in a profound and personal philosophy: Zen. This school of thought, with its emphasis on self-discipline, meditation, and the direct experience of enlightenment, offered the warrior a path to mental fortitude that was as essential as any martial skill. It was a philosophy that did not require rejection of the world, but rather full engagement with it, moment by moment. At the core of the Zen influence on the warrior was the practice of seated meditation. In the quiet of a temple or a private room, the samurai would strive to calm the monkey mind, the endless chatter of thoughts, fears, and ambitions. The goal was to achieve a state of mushin, or no mind. This was not an empty state, but one of heightened awareness, free from the hesitation and distraction of conscious thought. In the heat of battle, a warrior operating from this state could react with pure instinct, their body and sword moving as one without the delay of fear or calculation. This was the ultimate fusion of the spiritual and the practical. Zen taught the samurai to confront the ever-present reality of their own mortality. By accepting that life was transient, like the cherry blossoms that bloom so brilliantly for a short time, they could act with decisiveness and courage, free from the paralyzing fear of what might come. This acceptance of impermanence did not lead to passivity, but to a deeper appreciation for the present moment. Every action, whether wielding a sword or performing a tea ceremony, was to be undertaken with complete focus and sincerity. This philosophy permeated every aspect of samurai culture. The minimalist aesthetics of Zen influenced their art, their gardens, and their architecture. The deliberate, mindful movements of the tea ceremony, the focused energy of calligraphy, and the serene arrangement of a rock garden were all forms of moving meditation. They were practices that cultivated the same stillness and clarity a warrior needed to face an opponent. It provided a powerful counterbalance to their violent profession, a way to cultivate an inner calm that could not be shaken by the storms of the outside world. This internal strength, this warrior's soul forged in the quiet halls of meditation, would soon face its greatest test. As the authority of the central government crumbled, Japan was about to descend into an age of chaos that would demand more than just skill with a blade. It would demand a spirit of iron. For over a century, the islands of Japan knew no peace. The central authority of the shogunate in Kyoto had evaporated, leaving a power vacuum that ambitious regional lords, the daimyo, rushed to fill. This was the Sengoku Jidai, the age of warring states, an era of relentless conflict that would forge the samurai in a crucible of fire and steel. The old ways of warfare, with their emphasis on ritual and individual duels between mounted aristocrats, were swept away by a new, more brutal pragmatism. Survival was paramount, and honor was a luxury few could afford. Power was no longer a matter of noble lineage alone. It was seized and held by the sharpest sword and the most cunning mind. Ambitious retainers overthrew their masters, and alliances shifted like sand. The battlefield itself was transformed. Vast armies of foot soldiers, or ashigaru, armed with long pikes, became the backbone of daimyo armies. Castles grew into immense complex fortresses designed to withstand prolonged sieges. Strategy and logistics became as important as the courage of any single warrior. Into this volatile mix came a disruptive new technology. In 1543, Portuguese traders were shipwrecked on a southern island, bringing with them the matchlock firearm. The Japanese were quick to recognize its potential. Local smiths learned to replicate and improve upon the weapon, and soon, firearms were being produced in massive quantities. These weapons could pierce the finest armor, rendering years of traditional martial training less effective and changing military tactics forever. The samurai had to adapt or perish. This was an age of legendary figures and infamous betrayals. Powerful clans rose and fell in a single generation. Sons turned against fathers, and brothers fought for control of their inheritance. Every daimyo was a king in his own domain, constantly plotting to expand his territory while guarding against threats from his neighbors. For the individual samurai, it was a time of both great peril and great opportunity. A warrior of humble origins could rise to fame and fortune through skill and valor on the battlefield. But loyalty was a fragile commodity, and a single defeat could mean the end of one's lord, one's clan, and one's own life. The relentless strife took a heavy toll on the land and its people, yet it also fostered innovation, resilience, and a desperate yearning for order. Out of this century of fire and ambition, three figures would emerge, destined to reshape Japan forever. From the ashes of a fractured nation, three men of extraordinary will rose to forge a new Japan. They were Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu, the three great unifiers who would bring the century of conflict to a decisive end. The first was Oda Nobunaga, a brilliant but ruthless daimyo who shattered the old order. He saw the potential of firearms before his rivals and used them to devastating effect, most famously at the Battle of Nagashino in 1575. His organized ranks of musketeers decimated the legendary cavalry of the Takeda clan, signaling a permanent shift in Japanese warfare. Nobunaga was a visionary and a tyrant, crushing his enemies, including powerful Buddhist monastic orders, without mercy. His ambition was boundless, his motto, Tenka Fubu, to bring the realm under a single sword. Just as he was on the verge of total victory, he was betrayed by one of his own generals, and his life came to a sudden end. The mantle of unification was taken up by one of Nobunaga's most capable retainers, Toyotomi Hideyoshi. A man of humble peasant origins, Hideyoshi's rise was unprecedented. He was a master of both warfare and diplomacy. After swiftly avenging Nobunaga, he completed the conquest of Japan, subjugating the remaining independent daimyo through a brilliant mix of military might and political persuasion. To cement his rule and prevent future uprisings, Hideyoshi initiated a nationwide sword hunt, disarming the peasantry and rigidly defining the class structure. The samurai were now officially the sole armed class, a privileged elite distinct from the rest of society. When Hideyoshi passed away, his heir was just a child, leaving a council of powerful regents in his place. The most patient and cunning of them all was Tokugawa Ieyasu. A former ally of both Nobunaga and Hideyoshi, Ieyasu had spent decades building his power base. He saw his moment. In 1600, at the epic Battle of Sekigahara, the armies of Japan converged for one final, decisive clash. Ieyasu's victory was absolute. He systematically eliminated his rivals and established a new shogunate with its capital in the city of Edo. The age of war was over. But for the warrior class, a new challenge had just begun, finding a purpose in a world without battle. Peace, long sought, had finally arrived. The Tokugawa shogunate ushered in an era of unprecedented stability that would last for over 250 years. But for Japan's warriors, it presented a profound paradox. How does a warrior live when there are no more wars to fight? Stripped of their primary function, the samurai faced an existential crisis. They were a military aristocracy in a society that no longer required large-scale military action. To justify their continued status, their stipends, and their privilege to wear two swords, the samurai had to redefine their role. They transitioned from warriors to an administrative and bureaucratic class, serving their lords not on the battlefield, but in the halls of castles and government offices. In this new era of peace, the unwritten, often contradictory ethical codes of the battlefield began to be formalized and idealized. This was the true birth of what would later be called Bushido, the way of the warrior. It was less a reflection of how samurai had always behaved, and more an aspirational philosophy for how they ought to behave in a time of peace. Thinkers and scholars from the samurai class began to write extensively on the subject, seeking to create a moral and philosophical framework for their existence. They looked to the past, romanticizing the supposed virtues of earlier generations of warriors while combining them with principles from Zen and Confucianism. Writers like Yamaga Soko argued that the samurai's true purpose, even in peacetime, was to serve as a moral exemplar for the other classes of society. Their mastery of martial arts was not for waging war, but for cultivating discipline, resolve, and character. The sword became less a weapon and more a symbol of the soul, a physical representation of the warrior's honor and readiness. This new way of the warrior was an attempt to channel martial energies into constructive social roles. It emphasized unwavering loyalty to one's lord, strict self-discipline, and a profound sense of duty. The samurai became poets, scholars, and officials, their lives governed by a complex web of etiquette and ceremony. This period of introspection created a powerful, enduring myth of the ideal warrior, a figure who was not just a fighter, but a man of culture, integrity, and principle. This new way of the warrior was built upon a foundation of 7 core principles, pillars of character intended to guide every aspect of a samurai's life. At the heart of the warrior's code lay 7 virtues, a moral compass designed to forge not just a fighter, but a complete human being. These principles, codified during the long peace of the Edo period, became the pillars of the idealized samurai identity. The first and most fundamental was justice, or righteousness. For the samurai, this meant the power to decide upon a course of conduct in accordance with reason, without wavering. It was the ability to make the right decision and to act upon it with conviction. Closely linked to this was courage. This was not mere recklessness. True courage was exercised in the cause of what was right and just. It was what the philosophers called the courage to live when it is right to live, and to face a challenge when it is right to do so. The third virtue was benevolence, or compassion. The samurai's power and skill gave them a position of strength over others. Benevolence dictated that this strength should be used for the good of all. A true warrior was expected to be a protector of the weak, showing sympathy and mercy. This tempered their martial nature with a sense of humanity. A core tenet of their social interaction was respect. This was not about a fear of offending, but a genuine regard for the feelings of others. It manifested in politeness and proper etiquette, a way of showing respect for another's position and worth, even an enemy's. This virtue was essential for maintaining social harmony. Next came honesty and sincerity. The word of a samurai was considered a guarantee. Promises were not to be made lightly, for once given, they were to be kept at any cost. This absolute sincerity of action and word was a cornerstone of their personal integrity. Perhaps the most well-known virtue is honor. This was a vivid consciousness of personal dignity and worth. A samurai's good name was their most valuable possession, and any perceived slight against it was a serious matter. This intense sense of honor governed their every action, as their reputation reflected not just on themselves, but on their family and their lord. Finally, there was the unshakable pillar of loyalty. To their feudal lord, to their clan, and to their family, the samurai owed an unwavering and unquestioning devotion. This was the bond that held the entire feudal structure together. These 7 virtues formed an ideal, a vision of the perfect warrior. It was a standard few could ever fully achieve, yet its pursuit defined the soul of the samurai and continues to capture the imagination of the world. For the samurai, it was more than steel. It was an extension of the self, a physical manifestation of their honor, discipline, and purpose. The katana was, in their own words, the soul of the warrior. Its creation was a sacred act, a blend of elemental forces and profound spiritual intention. For months, a master swordsmith would labor, purifying himself through ritual before even touching his tools. The process was a testament to patience and perfection. He would heat, hammer, and fold the tamahagane steel thousands of times, laminating layers of hard and soft metal. This intricate folding removed impurities and created a blade of legendary strength and flexibility, with a grain pattern as unique as a fingerprint. The true magic happened during the quenching. The smith would coat the blade in a secret mixture of clay, thick along the spine and thin along the edge. Plunged into water, the edge cooled rapidly, becoming incredibly hard, while the spine cooled slowly, remaining softer and more resilient. This differential hardening created the distinctive temper line, the hamon, a wave-like pattern that was the smith's signature. It was this combination of a hard edge for cutting and a soft spine for shock absorption that made the katana such a formidable weapon. Yet, its significance went far beyond its function. Legends grew around the great masters. The blades of Masamune were said to be divine, imbued with the calm, protective spirit of their maker. In contrast, those of Muramasa were rumored to be cursed, possessing a thirst for conflict that could drive their owners to madness. To own a great sword was to be a custodian of a legacy. Families passed down blades for generations, each scratch and polish telling a story. The rituals surrounding the sword were complex and deeply ingrained. A samurai would never step over a sword lying on the floor. He would bow to it upon entering a home. To touch another's blade without permission was a grave insult. In this culture, the katana was not merely a tool for war. It was an object of art, a symbol of status, and a constant reminder of the fine line between life and duty. Its polished surface reflected the world, but for the samurai, it also reflected his own inner state, his readiness to face his destiny with a clear mind and a steady hand. The blade was his companion in life, and in many cases, his final attendant in fulfilling his ultimate duty. In the rigid world of the samurai, where honor was valued more than life itself, defeat or disgrace was an unbearable stain. To address this, the warrior class developed a practice that was, to them, the ultimate expression of control and courage, the ritual of seppuku. This was not a desperate, impulsive act, but a solemn, highly codified ceremony. It was a way for a samurai to atone for a failure, to protest a perceived injustice, or to follow a master in his final journey. By taking responsibility for their own end, they believed they could preserve their honor and that of their family for generations to come. The ritual was surrounded by profound gravity. The condemned samurai would bathe and dress in a formal white kimono, the color of purity. He would be given time to compose himself, often writing a final poem, a jisei, reflecting on the transient nature of life. The ceremony took place in a quiet, formal setting, such as a temple garden or a dedicated room within a mansion. Witnesses would be present, observing the proceedings in respectful silence. The central figure, however, was not always alone in his final moments. A trusted friend or skilled swordsman, known as the kaishakunin or second, stood by. His role was one of compassion, to perform a final, swift cut, ensuring the ritual concluded with dignity and minimal suffering. His presence transformed the act from a solitary ordeal into a shared, honorable rite. The most famous collective example involved the 47 Ronin. After avenging their master, they were sentenced by the shogun to perform this final duty. To them, it was not a punishment, but a validation. They had fulfilled their oath of loyalty, and now they would meet their end as true samurai, their honor restored, and their story immortalized. Seppuku represented the extreme endpoint of the warrior code, a chilling testament to the lengths a samurai would go to uphold his principles. It was a world where the manner of one's end was as important, if not more so, than the life that preceded it. But as Japan slowly entered an unprecedented era of peace, this brutal calculus of honor would face its greatest challenge. In 1603, the Tokugawa clan unified Japan, ending a century of relentless civil war. The result was the Edo period, an era of over 250 years of unprecedented domestic peace and stability. But for the nation's ruling warrior class, peace presented a profound existential crisis. The samurai, men bred for battle and defined by their martial prowess, suddenly found themselves as warriors without a war. Their very reason for being had vanished overnight. The Tokugawa shogunate, wary of the samurai's capacity for disruption, implemented strict controls. Warriors were required to reside in castle towns under the watchful eye of their lords, their movements and social interactions heavily regulated. The era of the wandering warrior, free to seek glory on the battlefield, was over. This enforced idleness bred deep frustration. Stripped of their primary function, many samurai struggled to find meaning. Some sought to maintain their skills through highly ritualized duels, which became legendary events. The famous confrontation between the master swordsman Miyamoto Musashi and his rival Sasaki Kojiro on Ganryu Island in 1612 was one of the last gasps of this older, more violent age. It was a clash of titans in a world that no longer needed them. For others, the path forward was intellectual. With battlefields replaced by libraries, many samurai immersed themselves in philosophy, literature, and the arts. They became scholars, poets, and patrons of no theater. They studied Confucian classics, which emphasized loyalty, social hierarchy, and civic duty, virtues that conveniently aligned with the shogunate's goal of transforming them from unpredictable fighters into reliable administrators. The samurai class was caught in a paradox. They were still the undisputed masters of the social order, instantly recognizable by the two swords, the long katana and the short wakizashi. They alone were permitted to wear. This daisho was the ultimate symbol of their authority and their right to enforce the law with swift finality. Yet, these blades were now more symbolic than practical. The calluses on their hands came not from wielding a sword, but from holding an ink brush. They were a class defined by a past they could no longer inhabit, struggling to reconcile their warrior identity with a peaceful present. The Great Peace had saved Japan from war, but it had set its most iconic warriors adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The long peace of the Edo period necessitated a fundamental reinvention of the samurai class. The Tokugawa shogunate required a stable, efficient government to manage its vast domain, and it turned to the very warriors it had pacified. The samurai's discipline, literacy, and ingrained sense of loyalty made them ideal candidates for the roles of civil administrators. And so, a profound transformation began. The warrior who once tracked enemies through mountain passes now tracked tax revenues in dusty archives. The strategist who planned castle sieges now planned rice distribution and public works. The ink brush, not the sword, became the primary tool of their trade. This shift came at a cost to their status and their pride. A samurai's wealth was not in land or currency, but in a fixed stipend of rice, paid by their lord. In the early days of warfare, this system worked, but as the centuries of peace wore on, a vibrant cash economy blossomed, driven by a burgeoning merchant class. These merchants, or chonin, were officially at the bottom of the social hierarchy, yet they grew immensely wealthy. In contrast, many samurai found their fixed incomes inadequate. They fell into debt, often to the very merchants they publicly disdained. This economic decline was a source of deep humiliation for a class that defined itself by its superiority. It was in this context of fading martial purpose that the concept of Bushido, the way of the warrior, was formalized. Thinkers like Yamaga Soko and Yamamoto Tsunetomo, author of the Hagakure, sought to define what it meant to be a samurai in an age without battle. Bushido became less a practical code for the battlefield and more a philosophical and moral guide for daily life. It romanticized the past, emphasizing virtues like absolute loyalty, self-sacrifice, and maintaining a constant awareness of one's mortality. This idealized code provided a sense of identity and moral purpose, a way to be a warrior in spirit even while working as a clerk. But this was a fragile construct. The samurai were clinging to the symbols of power, their name, their status, their two swords, while their real economic and political influence was slowly eroding from within. The foundation of their world was becoming brittle, unprepared for the seismic shock that was about to arrive from across the seas. While the samurai class cultivated an official culture of stoicism, frugality, and martial honor, the cities of Edo, Japan pulsed with a completely different energy. This was the ukiyo, or the floating world, a vibrant, hedonistic realm of urban entertainment that blossomed during the long peace. Centered in the pleasure districts of Edo, Kyoto, and Osaka, it was a world of kabuki theaters, sumo tournaments, tea houses with graceful geisha, and dazzling festivals. This was the domain of the newly rich merchant class, who, despite their low social status, had the wealth to indulge in fashion, art, and leisure. The floating world celebrated fleeting beauty, sensual pleasure, and the thrill of the present moment, ideas that stood in direct opposition to the samurai's rigid code of duty and self-denial. This created a deep and fascinating contradiction. Officially, samurai were expected to be models of Confucian virtue, scorning such frivolous and commercial pursuits. High-ranking officials issued edicts condemning the extravagance and moral laxity of the entertainment districts. Yet, many samurai were irresistibly drawn to the ukiyo's allure. They were men, after all, and the floating world offered an escape from the stifling formality of their daily lives. To avoid compromising their official standing, they would often visit these districts in disguise, hiding their faces with large hats or masks, becoming anonymous participants in the vibrant nightlife. By day, a stoic bureaucrat; by night, a patron of the theater, or a guest in an exclusive tea house. This cultural dynamism was captured in a new art form, ukiyo-e, or pictures of the floating world. These mass-produced woodblock prints, made famous by masters like Hokusai and Utamaro, depicted the celebrities of the day: charismatic kabuki actors in dramatic poses, celebrated beauties and courtesans in the latest fashions, and heroic scenes from history and myth. These prints were the popular media of their time, and they both shaped and reflected the tastes of a society in flux. The samurai were both the enforcers of the system that made this world possible, and, at times, its secret patrons. This paradox revealed the growing chasm between the idealized theory of the samurai code and the complex reality of life in a peaceful, prosperous Japan. The guardians of order were presiding over a culture that quietly celebrated everything they were supposed to stand against. The year is 1853. For over 2 centuries, Japan has been a world unto itself, deliberately shielded from the outside by the Tokugawa shogunate's policy of isolation. In the tranquil waters of Edo Bay, life proceeds as it has for generations. But on the horizon, columns of black smoke appear, a sight utterly alien to the Japanese people. These are the heralds of a new age, the steam-powered warships of the United States Navy, commanded by Commodore Matthew Perry. They are dubbed the Kurofune, the Black Ships. Their arrival is not a gentle knock, but a thunderous blow against the gates of the nation. The sheer scale and power of these vessels are beyond anything Japan has ever witnessed. Their cannons are larger, their hulls are impervious to traditional artillery, and they move against the wind with an unnatural force. The display of American technological might is a profound and terrifying shock to the shogunate and the samurai class that upholds it. For centuries, the samurai's mastery of the sword and the bow has been the bedrock of military power. Suddenly, it seems almost irrelevant. This confrontation ignites a crisis that tears at the very fabric of Japanese society. A fierce debate erupts within the highest circles of power. On one side are those who advocate for kaikoku, opening the country. They argue that resistance is futile and that Japan must learn from the West to avoid colonization. On the other side are the fervent traditionalists who cry, "Sono joy," revere the emperor, expel the barbarians. They see any concession as a betrayal of the nation's divine spirit and a stain upon its honor. The samurai class is split, their loyalty and purpose thrown into question. Some see the foreigners as an existential threat to their way of life, while others recognize the urgent need for change. The shogunate, caught between foreign pressure and domestic dissent, is paralyzed. Perry delivers an ultimatum from the American president, demanding Japan open its ports for trade. He promises to return with a larger fleet for their answer. The threat is clear. The era of the sword is being challenged by the age of the cannon. After centuries of quiet isolation, the world has come crashing in, and the shogunate, unable to offer a credible military response, is forced to relent. In 1854, the Convention of Kanagawa is signed, opening 2 ports to American ships. It is a moment of national humiliation, but also one of profound transformation. The tide has turned, and an entire way of life, the world of the samurai, is about to be swept away. The Meiji Restoration had promised to return power to the emperor, but it unleashed a whirlwind of change that few could have predicted. The new government, driven by the motto, "Enrich the country, strengthen the army," embarked on a path of radical modernization. Feudal domains were abolished, and the privileges of the samurai class were systematically dismantled. First, their government stipends were converted into bonds, often at a fraction of their original value. Then came the most symbolic blow of all, the Heian Edict of 1876, which forbade the wearing of swords in public. The sword was the soul of the samurai. To take it away was to strip them of their identity, their status, and their honor. Discontent simmered across the country, as thousands of warriors found themselves unemployed and adrift in a rapidly changing world. At the center of this storm was Saigo Takamori, a colossal figure both physically and politically. He had been one of the primary architects of the Meiji Restoration, a hero who helped topple the shogunate. Yet, he grew deeply disillusioned with the new regime's uncritical embrace of Western ways, believing it was eroding the Japanese spirit. He retreated to his home domain of Satsuma, where he established military academies that preserved the old warrior traditions. To disaffected samurai across Japan, Saigo became a living symbol of resistance. In 1877, tensions reached their breaking point. The government's attempts to disarm Satsuma sparked an open conflict, the Satsuma Rebellion. Saigo, reluctantly, led an army of traditional warriors against the new Imperial Japanese army. The war that followed was a tragic clash of eras. On one side were the samurai of Satsuma, armed with swords, spears, and old-fashioned muskets, fighting with legendary courage and discipline. On the other was a modern conscript army, equipped with superior rifles, artillery, and a logistical network built on telegraphs and railways. The outcome was inevitable. The samurai fought with incredible bravery, but they could not overcome the sheer industrial might of the Meiji state. The rebellion was systematically crushed. The final stand came at the Battle of Shiroyama, where Saigo's remaining few hundred warriors were surrounded by tens of thousands of imperial troops. In this final, desperate engagement, the last vestiges of the samurai as a military class were extinguished. Saigo Takamori met his end, cementing his legacy as Japan's last true samurai. His rebellion had failed, but his story would become a powerful, tragic legend about the cost of progress and the end of an age. With the samurai class officially abolished and their final military resistance crushed, one might expect their code to fade into history. But instead, something remarkable happened. The idea of the samurai was about to be reborn, not on the battlefield, but in the realm of philosophy and national identity. As Japan rapidly industrialized and built a modern nation-state, its leaders and intellectuals faced a new challenge. What did it mean to be Japanese in this new era? They needed a unifying ethos, a spiritual core that was uniquely Japanese, to guide the nation and distinguish it from the West. They found their answer in a romanticized image of their former warrior class. The key figure in this intellectual project was Nitobe Inazo, a diplomat, educator, and scholar. In 1900, While living in the United States, he wrote a short but immensely influential book in English titled Bushido, the Soul of Japan. His goal was to explain Japanese culture to a Western audience, using the samurai as a lens. He presented Bushido not as a complex, evolving set of unwritten rules, but as a codified philosophical system, a code of chivalry. Nitobe articulated what he called the 7 virtues of Bushido: justice, courage, benevolence, respect, honesty, honor, and loyalty. This framework was elegant, accessible, and highly appealing. However, it was also a modern interpretation. Historians point out that no single, universally accepted written code of Bushido existed during the samurai era. Nitobe synthesized and idealized various warrior traditions, blending them with Christian and Western philosophical concepts to make them understandable to his intended audience. His book became an international bestseller. More importantly, its ideas were re-imported back into Japan, where they were eagerly embraced. This newly forged Bushido was perfectly suited to the needs of the Meiji state. It was adapted from a code for an elite warrior class into a moral guide for the entire nation. The ultimate loyalty once owed to a feudal lord was now redirected to the emperor and the state. These ideals of self-sacrifice, discipline, and unwavering loyalty were instilled in the new national conscript army and taught in public schools. The samurai warrior was gone, but his spirit, reimagined and codified, had become the soul of modern Japan, a powerful tool for forging a unified and fiercely proud national identity. The samurai as a social class vanished more than a century ago, yet their shadow looms large over the landscape of modern Japan. The warrior may have laid down his swords, but the ideals associated with his code, whether historically precise or romantically embellished, are deeply woven into the nation's cultural DNA. This legacy is perhaps most visible in the world of Japanese business. The post-war economic miracle saw the rise of the salaryman, or salaried man, often described as a corporate samurai. The parallels are striking. The unwavering loyalty once pledged to a feudal lord was often transferred to a corporation, with concepts like lifetime employment fostering a powerful sense of belonging and duty. The samurai values of perseverance, discipline, and sacrificing personal needs for the good of the group became hallmarks of the Japanese work ethic. This dedication helped build Japan into an economic superpower, with companies operating like tightly knit clans, striving for collective honor and success. The warrior spirit is also meticulously preserved in the world of modern martial arts, or Budo. Disciplines like Kendo, the way of the sword, directly descend from the combat techniques of the samurai. But they are more than just sports. They are philosophical paths. Practitioners seek not only to master the physical movements, but also to cultivate inner strength, discipline, and respect, core tenets of the idealized warrior code. In the quiet intensity of a Kendo dojo, in the precise forms of Aikido, the spirit of Bushido is a living, breathing practice. Beyond the office and the dojo, the samurai aesthetic continues to inform Japanese art and culture. The minimalist elegance, the focus on form and function, and the appreciation for transient beauty can be traced back to sensibilities cultivated by the warrior class. This influence is most famously seen in cinema. The films of director Akira Kurosawa, for instance, did more than any textbook to define the image of the noble, conflicted samurai for a global audience. His masterpieces are not just action films, they are profound explorations of honor, duty, and humanity, themes central to the samurai mythos. From the formal bow of a business executive to the focused calm of a martial artist, the echoes of the samurai are everywhere in Japan, a testament to a powerful legacy that continues to shape the nation's character. The story of the samurai does not end in Japan. In a final, remarkable transformation, this uniquely Japanese warrior has transcended national and cultural boundaries to become a global archetype. The samurai has achieved a form of immortality, not as a historical figure, but as a universal symbol of discipline, honor, and the relentless pursuit of perfection. This global journey began in earnest with cinema. Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai was not just a masterpiece of Japanese film. It was a story so powerful that Hollywood remade it as the classic Western, The Magnificent Seven. The feudal Japanese warriors were seamlessly transformed into American gunslingers, proving the universal appeal of their code of protecting the weak. But the most profound cinematic legacy is found in a galaxy far, far away. George Lucas has openly cited Japanese cinema and the samurai as a primary inspiration for Star Wars. His Jedi Knights are galactic samurai, stoic, disciplined warriors following a spiritual code, wielding laser swords like futuristic katanas. Darth Vader's iconic armor is a direct descendant of a samurai's helmet and mask. The influence is unmistakable, embedding the samurai ethos deep within modern pop culture. The archetype has flourished in other media as well. From the lone ronin of comic books to the powerful sword-wielding characters in countless video games, the samurai provides a rich template for heroic storytelling. The appeal lies in the combination of deadly skill and a strict moral code, a powerful warrior who is also a philosopher. Beyond entertainment, the concept of Bushido has been adopted and adapted by people around the world seeking a guide for self-improvement. Business executives read treatises on samurai strategy to gain a competitive edge. Athletes and martial artists study the principles of focus and discipline to enhance their performance. The seven virtues articulated by Nitobe Inazo have become a secular moral compass for many, offering a path to a more honorable and purposeful life. The samurai class may be extinct, their castles may be ruins, but their ideals have proven to be more resilient than stone and more powerful than any sword. They have become a shared global heritage, a testament to the idea that while a warrior's life is finite, the quest for honor, discipline, and mastery is timeless.